Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So you made it, guys. You guys are the Fantastic Four. I like to say the Fantastic 40, but at least we have some people that made it to the end. But I guess I shouldn't be too surprised because normally I would say, because I've been doing this for like 3 years, right? Sometimes we start off with a really nice bunch of like up to 30 people. And then usually by the end, it's like around like the 5 to 10 mark, right? So this is pretty normal. And especially like after doing this course, or at least this style of course for a little while now. But even if four of you guys benefited, alhamdulillah, that's going to do wonders for you and for the community because there are so many people that don't know how to answer these basic questions, right? We have non-Muslims literally everywhere, and there's so many opportunities. Like my aunt just came from Oklahoma, right? I haven't seen her in 10 years. So there's got to be a dawah pitch like ready to come for that, right? Because like, the opportunity is just kind of right there. And you guys are going to find lots of opportunities in your own life, right? You're going to meet friends and colleagues and people that you haven't seen in a long time and might have some, cousins or distant cousins that might not be firmly on the deen, right? So there's going to be lots of opportunities for you to give dawah. In the other course, we discussed how converting one person to Islam is better than basically having 100 red camels. And the scholars, they explain that 100 red camels in our time means like 100 red Ferraris, right? Because the locomotion changed, but the concept of luxury didn't, right? So whatever would be considered 100, hot rods of locomotion in our times would be kind of like the equivalent reward. And also the Prophet told us that anybody who teaches a sunnah hasana, he will get that hasana as well, right? Every time the other person does it. So after you help somebody become Muslim, I highly suggest you make sure that they learn Surah Al-Fatiha from you, because that's the surah they're going to recite 17 times a day, where every harf is worth 10 hasanats, right? And that's the minimum, right? If they're really sincere and they have khushu', who knows? Maybe every letter is going to be worth 100 or 1,000 hasanat, right? So if you want to really have what they say in business, a big ROI, right? A return on investment, highly suggest when you deal with a new Muslim, make sure he knows how to pray and definitely try to teach him Surah Al-Fatiha. Yeah, inshallah, you won't regret it. Okay, so today we're going to focus on our last lesson. And today our main focus is like the second half of refuting atheism, right? And I said in the first section of this that there aren't that many arguments actually that atheists use. If you know the top 10, you're usually very well grounded. Like there's not many more arguments after that. So we're going to try to kind of wrap this up, inshallah, with today's lesson. I think at least even just if you had three of these and you mastered them really good, like for example, like today we're going to look at the irreducible complexity argument, right? I kind of alluded to it last week. The idea like if you have a cell, you can't have a cell where the ribosomes aren't there, or the mRNA or the DNA isn't there, or the cell membrane isn't there. If you just have one of these parts missing, the whole system doesn't work. So then how did it randomly generate itself the first time? And if it didn't generate itself in a complete form, then it couldn't live, thrive, or survive, or even multiply. So if you can't even do that with one cell randomly, then how would you explain life? Unless it was all orchestrated by Allah Azza wa Jal, unless it was all made perfectly in the right way to survive in the first place. So, and then we'll look at the fine tuning argument. We'll look at a lot of examples of this because there's so much fine tuning in the universe that it is really logically unfathomable to think that this all happened by chance because there's just so many variables that all line up perfectly. And then we'll also look into the issue of evolution itself. What we need to understand with evolution is that it's not really creation versus evolution. There are articles online, and there are people like, especially Christians, that get really touchy about this subject because they believe that evolution is directly attacking like the story in Genesis. Genesis means the beginning. It's the first chapter in the Bible. They say in the beginning was God, and then God said, "Let there be light, and let there be plants, and it's let there be this, let there be that." And in Christian theology, they believe that God made everything instantaneous. Now we believe that Allah can make things instantaneous because Allah says, "Kun fayakun," be, and it is. But that doesn't mean that everything has to happen immediately, right? Like, just think of yourself. Would whatever age you are right now, whether you're 20 or you're 30 or 40, are you the age you are right now within the fraction of a second? The answer is obviously not, right? There was tadarruj, it was gradual, it was progressive, right? And when we talk about how Allah made the earth in 6 days, right? the scholars, they argue that the word ayam, meaning days, as opposed to yom, which means one day, it could mean day or it could mean an epoch. Epoch meaning a period of time. So not specifically limited to 24 hours. And the greatest proof you have of this is Yom al-Qiyamah, right? Anybody know how long Yom al-Qiyamah is going to be? Anybody ever read a hadith about the length of Yom al-Qiyamah? Anybody know? So there's a hadith that tells us, in fact, there might actually be an ayah about this in Surah Al-Ma'arij, but there's definitely a dalil that Yom Al-Qiyamah is 50,000 years of our time, right? So that means, even though it's a day, it's not a day like the day of today, right? And even what we call a day right now is relative to what? We as human beings, or not technically us, some scientists that came before us decided, we think a day is when the earth revolves one time, right? It does one cycle as it's rotating from day to night. They could have made it based on a different measurement, but because they chose that relative measurement, that's what became a day, right? So on the day of judgment, when the sun is still and it's brought a mile towards the earth and it's going to stay there for a while, then it's going to be a real long time, right? 50,000 years, but it's still going to be called a yom. So when Allah says he created the earth in 6 days, it doesn't have to mean 24-hour days. So just understand that linguistically, this is capable with the Arabic language. So if somebody is like, how can you say it only happened to, we're not actually saying that. We're saying it could have been that, or it could have been over time, which means there's no clash in terms of the idea of early life taking time to evolve, right? So the idea that it's like creationism or evolution, that's really not actually the case. The main thing we have an issue with is the idea that human beings started from monkeys, right? We're a different type of creation altogether. And you might have seen this meme online if you go on, especially on Google Images, and you type in like refuting atheism or humans and monkeys, you'll probably see an image of like they try to show like a gradual human and a monkey, and then like the last human turns around and looks at the monkeys and is like, "Stop following me." And one of the main arguments with this is that if if it was true that human beings, there was like a 90% human, 10% monkey, 80-20, 70-30, 60-40, 50-50, and so on, if that was true, then why don't we have 50% human monkeys walking around today? Why not 80-20 human monkeys and 90-10 human monkeys? If this is actually how it happened, there should be lots of remnants of all these different proportions, right? We see in the other animals within the kingdom, if we look at flies, we see flies with different colors of eyes, with different colored wings. We see these natural variations. We can track them. Where are all the half human, half monkeys? There should be tons of them. Where are the 80% humans and 20% monkeys? Where are they? Right? So there's a lot of just based on logic, a lot of missing gaps in the theory of evolution. And also, we're not saying that evolution is the same as adaptive radiation. Basically, every Muslim scholar that I know of, and pretty much every Muslim with a sane mind and has some basic background in Islamic studies, they don't argue with adaptive radiation. This is the idea that small changes happen based on your environment. Like if you're living in a cold country for a really long time, your skin color will actually get whiter because why? You're getting less sunlight, so it means you're getting less melanin to your skin, right? For me, I don't actually like being ultra ghost white, so I found a hack for that. Instead of standing in the sun and then getting the extra radiation and then making my skin age, I just realized, if you take black seed has essentially like some kind of melanin ingredient in it. It'll give you a free glow without getting the burn of the sun, right? So it's a bit of a hack, right? Didn't really have to talk about that during this lesson, but there's a first for everything. So anyways, we're going to look at different ways we can refute atheism. So let's get on to that. So Charles Darwin. Remember last week how we said Charles Darwin had doubts? Well, he did have doubts. He had doubts about many things about evolution, despite the fact that when people say, Charles Darwin, he's like the founder of evolution, the founder who didn't even firmly believe in his results, the founder who was an agnostic, who wasn't an atheist, who in many cases, he felt confused about his own theory. And we're going to just give a little snapshot of that, just so we can realize that don't think that this is all foolproof. Even some of the early founders of evolution didn't really believe that evolution was a fact. So the people who claim that, oh, evolution, it's not a theory anymore. That doesn't really seem to show, and not even according to the founders of evolution itself. Most people, if they're sincere, will tell you, even atheists themselves will tell you that it's still a theory of evolution, even though they believe it. Because they know that there's gaps in the theory itself. So when we look at what Charles Darwin wrote, it says that he expressed doubts and difficulties regarding aspects of his theory, especially about the complexity of the eye. You're going to see just a snapshot of how complex the eye can really be. So Darwin, he wrote in his Origin of Species, he said, to suppose that the eye, with all its inimitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. The eye is such a complex system in the body. First of all, your body has your eyes are what's called trichromatic. So your eyes actually only take in three colors. They take in red, blue, and green. But from these patterns, they can create over 10 million different colors, right? And it's very sophisticated how that works. On top of that, you have specific muscles inside of your eye that adjust to the focus of what you're looking at in the room. So similar to when you're using a real camera, if you're looking at something that's far away and you don't have it on autofocus, you actually have to adjust the lens and make it go in and out so that you can start to adjust and focus at different depths. The human eye does this naturally, right? And then in addition to that, it takes in light, it goes behind the eye, it goes through the optic nerve, then connects to your brain, and then it interprets light and then configures it into colors, right? It's extremely complex. So then the question remains is that how could have this been from chance? Dr. Russell Lazarus and many modern ophthalmologists, which means like basically an eye doctor, they note that the eye has 2 million working parts. Like when we look at it, it just looks like a ball, right? There's actually 2 million parts or cells that make up the eye. And the fact that all of this actually works as one functional unit is mind-blowing, right? And that's just the eye. What about the rest of the body and how it all works together and how it performs homeostasis? And that, like, if you're, like we said last week, if you're shivering, your body shivers as a response to being cold because it wants to warm up. Or if you're feeling hot, then your body starts to sweat to try to cool down. So your body has all these these checks and balances that it has working inside of it. And how is this all happening by chance? How is this just like something that just occurred on its own without any cause or any purpose or any reason? So he expresses this horrid doubt. So this is just to let us know about Charles Darwin. And then the next point is the fine tuning of the universe. There's so many examples of this. On the next slide, we're going to look at a paragraph of them. But this is one really solid argument, is that Walter Bradley, he explains, he's a scientist, and he says that if you were to reduce the gravitational pull by 2% of that, what exists between atoms, because like, for example, this table, as you guys know from science, whether something is a solid or a liquid or a gas, it's made of atoms. Atoms are those tiny little marbles that have protons, neutrons, and electrons. Its gravity and the electromagnetic charge between the electrons and the protons and the neutrons, that's actually holding that little jumble of marbles together. If you reduced gravity by 2%, none of these atoms could hold themselves together again. They'd all go Humpty Dumpty all apart, and nobody could put it back together again, right? The whole universe would actually collapse. Everything that you see around you would not exist. That's the fine tuning of the universe when it comes to something, as just, if we want to just specify on gravity, that's all it takes to destroy the universe. It's just a 2% shift in gravity and we're all toast, right? So this is, when we talk about the fine tuning of the universe, this is why we're saying the universe is too complex to have been haphazardly designed by nothing. That it must have been designed by something, because we know, and I tried to give the simple example of your house. If you have kids running around your house and you have no parents babysitting them, let's say you were like me and you have a 6 and a 7-year-old at home, and you just let the kids, you decide, you and the wife, you go on vacation for a week, you leave the kids, the 6 and the 7-year-old at home for a week, and you assume, oh, what's the worst that could happen, right? Well, probably the house is going to go on fire. Probably everything is going to be in a mess before it goes on fire. So realistically, if you don't have something in control of the situation, you have chaos, right? So when we look at the universe, we see that there's so many specific patterns that it doesn't really seem logical to assume that this happened by chance, especially life, right? The idea of like a conscious living being that can make decisions in their brain, that actually has free will to make decisions. How does that get randomly selected from non-living life or abiotic life into living life? How does water and rocks and air randomly select, okay, in the future we're now going to have a frog that can think and jump around and have a habitat? Like, how does that happen? What else? All right, so the irreducible complexity argument. This is what we were trying to say with the cells. If you have, regardless if the cell is a prokaryote, right? Like a, for example, like a bacteria cell that doesn't have a nucleus, or if we're talking about a eukaryote cell, so like a human cell, right, or an animal or a plant cell that has a nucleus. Either way, if you don't have DNA or RNA, if you don't have the cell membrane, if you don't have ribosomes, and if you don't have mitochondria, you don't have a cell and the cell membrane, if I forgot to mention that. So that's at least five components that you need to have for the cell to survive. And if you can't have one cell survive, you can't have any more after that, right? So the idea that life just happened, it's a really far-fetched argument because there's so many complex parts that if you just take one out, life can't exist. So this is the irreducible complexity argument. We're saying like it's if you just removed one thing, none of this complex system would work and you would have no life. So how could that possibly be random? Here are a bunch of examples. I'm not going to read them all, but this just gives you an idea of like just life on Earth. How many systems have to be in place for life to exist on this planet? For example, we need liquid water, right? For so many things, right? Our bodies are like 67, 70% water. It's the natural solvent that dissolves different types of chemicals and mixtures within the world for so many different chemical reactions. Our carbon-based chemistry, the carbon's unique bonding forms, complex molecules. Like when you look at most of the molecules in our body, they're carbon-based, right? And because it's able to branch and connect to so many different extra elements, so that helps for human life. And all living things are carbon backbone based. The source of energy when it comes to like photosynthesis. How does a plant randomly select the ability to do photosynthesis? Like to have already the what do you call it? The chloroplast inside of the cell so that they can absorb the sunlight and then convert, using that and water and carbon dioxide and create glucose and create oxygen and then build the biological symbiosis or the mutual symbiosis of giving that oxygen to humans and animals, and then we breathe out the carbon dioxide to help feed the cycle of photosynthesis for the same plants. Like, how do you have such a complex system and then this is all by chance? Does it make any sense? How would the first plant, because they argue plants came before humans, right? How did the first plant naturally select that I'm going to have a chloroplast and I have this game plan that I'm going to start collecting CO2 and that's how I'm going to survive? Like, how did the first cell decide that it's going to have all these working parts inside of it? And if a plant cell didn't have a chloroplast in it from the beginning, how is it going to get its energy? As human beings, we have to actually look for our own food, right? We have to get up and hunt, or we have to go to the grocery store because somebody else did the hunting for us. But the point is, we have to get up and move and find our own food. How did the first plant cell know, maybe I need a chloroplast because I'm not going to be doing a lot of moving around here in the valley. I'm going to be trying to absorb, soak up some sun for energy. So come on, chloroplast. Yeah. Okay, I think I got it. Did that happen? Does that even make any logical sense? They say that cells don't even have brains. They don't even think that plants can think. So then how did it get a chloroplast? Protective atmosphere. The atmosphere, it protects radiation from the sun, but it also allows just enough in and then works as a blanket to help bounce off some of the heat back down to Earth so that we don't freeze overnight, so that we don't get overcooked, nor do we get freezer burn and die from either or, right? Um, the essential elements of life. If we didn't have like the big five or the big six, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, and sulfur, you wouldn't have life, right? Day and night cycles, that helps to balance the temperatures. Magnetic field, we were saying last week how solar flares, there are like big waves of flames that come off of the sun, and some of them can basically reach the earth. And if we didn't have the magnetosphere, which is the iron and nickel core in the middle of the earth, we wouldn't have this magnetic force field that prevents those solar flares from basically cooking us all alive. Every once in a while, a little bit of the solar flare breaches through the magnetosphere. When that happens, and it has happened historically, there was a place, I think in America, like Los Angeles, the entire electrical grid was shut off, right? From just a little bit of a solar flare getting through the magnetosphere. So then what if there was no magnetosphere? There'd be no life. How is it that the Earth just randomly happens to have nickel and iron in its core to build this shield against all this radiation from the stars, right? Like there's just so many elements for you to say that it happened from chance. The distance from the sun, if you were just a little bit further or a little bit closer, we would be either frozen or cooked. If we were at the distance of Mars, then you know, right? It's way too cold for there to be any human life on there, right? Water's frozen all year round if you're living on Mars. What else? The nutrient cycles, like we were talking about photosynthesis. There's also the nitrogen cycle, all living things that they need nitrogen to survive. There needs to be ways to actually get the nitrogen. Plants get it through nitrogen fixation. Then we eat the plants to get nitrogen from the plants, but it's all part of a big cycle. Then you have the carbon cycle, you have the water cycle, you have the oxygen cycle, you have all these cycles in order for life to actually survive. Again, just by chance? Is that logical? Is there any explanation for why that exists even in the first place? And then we go to the issue of, we said before, the cosmological argument or the first cause. If the universe began as a big bang, and this is what the scientists, they argue, right? Even the atheists, they say the universe began. They say that, right? They give it a huge number of decimal places about how like unlikely it is for it to happen, but they say that the universe began. So then what made it begin? And they'll tell you, I don't know. We'll tell you, we know, right? We know that Allah took the heavens and the earth and He clove it asunder. And then Allah said He's expanding the universe. He told us that in the Quran. We know based on Dr. Albert Hubble's research that when he looked at light spectrometry, that he saw there's in physics you have what's called a redshift light pattern and a blue shift light pattern. He saw the redshift light pattern in all the stars, which in physics means that an object is moving further away from you. So based on that observation, we know that all the stars around us are still expanding outwards. And Allah told us that He's still expanding the universe. So therefore it confirms exactly with modern day science. Then you have the law of thermodynamics, right? Anyways, you have energy conservation, you've got entropy, you got a whole bunch of things that show the fine tuning of the universe. And then we have mathematical signatures within the universe. We talked about Fibonacci scale, right? The 0.618 golden ratio, right? And we said that like if you take this ratio, it's basically like it's not exactly double, but it's kind of like, so let's say like 60-ish percentile. So like the area of this finger compared to this part of my finger. And then the area of my actual finger would be the golden ratio would be from here to my hand. And then if you take the golden ratio of this and you add the 0.681, then you end up getting this length. And if you add this length, you end up getting the entire arm. And this is in multiple bases of the human being, but then everything you see here in green on the screen are more examples of Fibonacci's, golden ratio, right? Hurricanes, cyclones, pine cones, sunflower seeds, honeycombs. I feel like a lot of this stuff is just rhyming, or I just happen to work out like that today. Anyways, it's all there. And if you guys want to look up more examples online, there are tons. So the question is, how is this random? Because this is a mathematical pattern that's consistent throughout the universe. Even the galaxies are above our head. The spirals of the galaxies follow the Fibonacci scale or this golden ratio, this mathematical pattern. How is this all happening by chance? Normally, when you see a pattern in something, you know that there was a designer. When you look at a program, if you look at like, for example, Python, right? There's a specific syntax that's used in coding. So okay, clearly there was a coder or a developer that made this software. So why would it be any different when we see the coding or the number pattern within the universe itself? And as I said, this is not the modern day tafsir about the issue of let them be apes, but technically in Surah Al-Baqarah, in Ayah 65, it talks about the Yahud that they didn't follow the Sabbath day, right? Their punishment was that they would become monkeys. So what this would actually be is de-evolution as opposed to evolution, right? Evolution claims that it's always progressive, right? Like you're going from like a bug to like a dinosaur, and then one day you're like a super smart human being, right? That's like what they claim, right? But you could make the argument that if evolution was truly random, there should be equal evolution and de-evolution everywhere, right? But we don't see that. We see normally it's advantageous, which also kind of shows the proof of something governing it, right? And we said Allah is al-musawwar. Now, of course, if Allah wanted to degrade something, if He wanted to debase it, He could, just like He did with the Yahud who were disobedient to Him, and He turned that specific group of Yahud into monkeys. But again, does this disprove Islam? Does this disprove God's existence? No. Allah can create whatever He wants. If Allah is al-musawwir, He can evolve or de-evolve whatever He wants. What makes you think that evolution, clashes with that? If Allah can create whatever He wants, He can make it spontaneous, or He can make it bitadarruj, gradually transforming it over time, and He can evolve or de-evolve it, then actually there's no clash between the idea of God creating and God evolving, as in God evolving things, right? God Himself He keeps His attributes, but whatever He wants to create, He can change it as He likes. Just look at embryology. Human beings, they start off as a small egg, a zygote, inside of the womb of a mother. And then it gets fertilized, and then it starts to look like a worm. And then the alaq, if you look at the alaq, it looks like, because an alaq means a leech, right? It also means something that's hanging, and it means something that is like a blood clot. And what they found is that in the first 21 days of development of the embryo, does it have these characteristics? It has all three. Just think about that, because at this point, the embryo is smaller than a kernel of wheat. It is microscopic, and you cannot see this detail with the naked human eye. So you need a microscope to see this. But if you had a microscope and it was under 21 days and you looked at the alaq, what would you see? You would see something that looks like a leech, that clings to the uterine wall, that basically sucks nutrients like a leech. And why is it a blood clot? How could a leech be a blood clot? Because it doesn't have a heart until day 21. And if it doesn't have a beating heart, blood that doesn't move, what do we call it? We call it a blood clot, right? So it actually meets all the criterion way before we had the modern day equipment to explain what the alaq is, right? Like, do you think the Arabs of 1400 years ago had access to telescopes and microscopes and all the high-tech stuff we have today? No. But it just goes to show that the ayat are explaining things in way more detail than the people of that time even knew. Further proving how when science finally catches up to the Quran, that the Quran was right all along. Again, proving that creation is not random. Everything was planned. And so we get to the grand finale slide. Today was a bit of a shorter class, but as you can see, we don't really need that many arguments to prove that atheism is wrong, right? If you can basically prove that there are so many sophisticated mathematical patterns in the universe within creation itself, and the fact that we didn't even get into all the detail, but if you guys just wanted something nice to watch, I would highly recommend you guys watch. It's a YouTube's, I want to call it a series, but really it's at least, yeah, it's about 4 hours. It's two parts, at least over 2 hours for each part, by Dr. Zakir Naik. It's Islam and Modern Science. He tells you that there's over 1,000 scientific ayat in the Quran based on empirical evidence, things that you can actually observe and test in actual nature, and that the Quran is confirming these scientific facts. I don't think he goes through all 1,000, but I think he probably goes over, I'm going to say around at least 100, right, of scientific science, things that Allah said, I created it like this. And then you go to nature and you see He did it just like that, right? And it's consistently accurate. And if anybody's logical, the possibility of anyone or anything predicting over 100 things to be correct in the future or in the hidden past, and to get it all correct without one mistake, you cannot say that this is guesswork. And that's why we say, even for Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that because he was getting the revelation, And if for him to be given at least 1,000 ayat about science, and for it to be consistently accurate, and on top of that, for him to get prophecies predicting things that would happen in the future and things that happened in the past that people didn't fully discover yet at that time, and for all of it to be correct, even for it to be 100 things, even though it's way more than 100. There's actually a website, I talked about this in the first course. I think it's called like provingislam.com. They give you 101 hadith prophecies that already happened, like that they already proved. They were future prophecies, but we're living in a time now that we could verify all 101 of those signs. Does it make logical sense that anyone, I don't know, it doesn't matter what the person's name is, right? If his name is like Bob, Dave, Charlie, for Charlie to come up with 100 things to be true and proven in the future and not make even one mistake, is that possible based on guesswork? The answer is obviously not. Even when they said Nostradamus predicted the Twin Towers falling, right? If you actually read his works, it talks about like two brothers falling. Okay, we're going to turn brothers into towers now. Like that's a real stretch of the imagination just to try to make somebody sound like a prophet when clearly that's not the case in terms of Nostradamus, right? Just something to think about. So in terms of the wrap up for this course, it's exactly 2 weeks before December 11th, and no connection between 9/11 and December 11th here. I'm just saying it's December 11th is the day of the exam, right? So it's going to be just straightforward multiple choice, no short answer. It'll be 2 weeks from now. It'll be on the IDA Academy website. So if you are a credit student, you just log in. I'll make it an all-day thing. You want to do the exam morning, afternoon, evening, doesn't matter. You just log in, you do the whatever is it, like maybe 40 questions or so. And then I will probably just do it in Google Forms. That way it's auto-graded. So if your internet connection is fast, expect to get your grade within 10 seconds. So just do the multiple choice exam if you want to get the credit. And then the other half was the typed assignment, right? Knowing that we're living in the generation of AI, I really honestly can't prevent you guys from using it. And I actually don't want to prevent you guys from using it as a research tool. So what I thought is, use your AI, use your research tools as you like to collect 5 arguments to defend Islam against like 5 anti-Islamic arguments, right? So it could be about any religion or any ideology. It could be about what secularism says about Islam, or Christianity, or atheism, or Judaism, or Hinduism, or Buddhism, or Taoism, or whatever ism you can think of, right? So your goal is just to find 5 arguments that are used against Islam, disprove them, and the human touch would be just write a short reflection after each point, whether you like the argument, you would use it in your own personal life, that you feel like this is actually practical. Then I know you put at least a little bit of human effort into it. And then at the same time, you benefited from practicing your research skills, right? It's not like it's rocket science, right? It's just to prove that it can be done very easily. And that's an easy 50% of your grade. So really, there's no reason you can fail this course. You get the 50%, and you're almost guaranteed to get at least 1% on a multiple choice exam, right? So you should pass regardless. So that's the grade schematic, 50-50. So in terms of the assignment, just try to have it finished within the next 2 weeks. There's no class next week because this is the last class, right? So next week, there's no class. The week after that, on the same Thursday, I'll make it an all-day online exam. You just log in and, you probably might, I think it'll just ask you to fill in like Google Forms, just ask you like first name, last name, maybe your email, and then you start doing the multiple choice test. So you have 2 weeks to finish the assignment, and then 2 weeks from now, the exam will be an all-day thing. You finish that. If for whatever reason you can't submit your assignment online, I attached my email there, so you can send it to me via email, and I will try to, collect the grades as quick as possible and submit it most likely to Noha. I think she'll probably be in charge of the grades, or whoever's in charge of the grades, to make sure that, it's within the system for those that want to get their credits within the IDA. So Jazakumullahu khairan for coming and for attending this course. And inshallah, I hope you guys benefit from this course and all the other courses here at the Imam Development Academy. And thank you for sticking it out till the end. That's like the golden skill in life, is if you can be consistent, you can pretty much do whatever you want, right? بإذن الله. So, barakallahu fikum. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Ouais.